They mocked her, interrupted her, and tried to destroy her reputation. Now they're the ones begging for mercy. Karoline Leavitt had faced her fair share of tough interviews. She was no stranger to pushback, especially from the liberal media. But this time was different. This wasn't just the usual political sparring or a heated exchange of ideas. It felt deliberate, calculated, an outright assault on her credibility. She had been invited onto the talk show under the guise of a policy discussion, or so they claimed. But the moment she sat down, she could feel the shift in the room. The tension was palpable, and it wasn't the kind that came from healthy debate. It felt like a trap. The first few questions were predictable, almost routine. But then, without warning, one of the hosts leaned forward, his tone sharp and dripping with condescension. "Let's be honest, Karoline," he said, his voice cutting through the air. "You're not here because of your qualifications. You're here because you're loyal. That's why you got the job, isn't it?" The audience reacted immediately. Gasps, murmurs, a few stifled laughs. Karoline's expression remained calm, but inside, she felt the shift. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was a performance, and she was the target. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Losing her cool wasn't an option. That's exactly what they wanted. "I'm here because I've earned my place," she replied, her voice firm. "If you disagree, let's talk policy, not personal attacks." But they weren't interested in policy. They wanted a reaction. Another host smirked, glancing at the audience before delivering the next blow. "Earned or handed to you? Because from where we're sitting, it looks like loyalty is the only qualification that matters these days." The audience clapped, and Karoline realized what was happening. This wasn't spontaneous. It was rehearsed, planned. The goal wasn't to debate her. It was to humiliate her. The next few minutes were a blur. They interrupted her, laughed dismissively, and twisted her words at every turn. No matter what she said, it was reframed or ignored entirely. The segment wasn't about conversation. It was about control. But Karoline didn't break. She held her ground, firing back with facts and refusing to give them the emotional outburst they were after. Then, as the segment was winding down, the host delivered the final blow. "Women like you set us back," he said, his voice cold. "You're a pawn, and deep down you know it." The room fell silent. Even the audience seemed unsure how to react. Karoline's jaw tightened, not out of anger, but out of a deeper realization. They weren't attacking her because they believed what they were saying. They were attacking her because they were afraid of her. She smiled, slow and deliberate. "If standing up for my beliefs makes me a pawn," she said, "then so be it. But at least I'm not a puppet." The segment ended and the cameras cut. The damage was done, or so they thought. But they had underestimated one thing: the backlash that was coming. The clip went viral almost instantly. Within hours, it was everywhere. Twitter, YouTube, conservative news outlets. At first, the network tried to control the narrative. They edited the segment, framing it as just another heated debate, and pushed their usual headlines. But it wasn't enough. The full unedited version was already out there, and it painted a very different picture. Conservatives weren't just angry, they were furious. Comment sections flooded with accusations of media bias, double standards, and outright bullying. Even some liberals, uncomfortable with how far the host had gone, admitted it was a bad look. But it didn't stop there. The show sponsors started getting tagged in posts. Viewers weren't just mad, they were strategic. They flooded advertisers with messages, demanding to know why they supported a platform that openly degraded women who didn't conform to their politics. Some companies tried to ignore it, while others issued vague statements. But then one of the biggest sponsors pulled out. Their statement was carefully worded, but the message was clear. They didn't want to be associated with divisive and unprofessional discourse. That was the first domino. The rest fell quickly. The network scrambled into damage control mode. Anonymous sources leaked reports of panic behind the scenes, executives demanding answers, frantic meetings about how to regain control. The host remained silent at first, then released a half-hearted statement about passionate discussions and differing perspectives. But it was too late. Karoline hadn't said a word publicly yet. She didn't need to, because now there were whispers of something bigger. Rumors swirled that she was preparing a lawsuit, not just for defamation, but for targeted harassment, professional harm, and possibly even coordinated media misconduct. The network had faced backlash before, but this was different. Karoline sat in a dimly lit office in Washington, D.C., across from her legal team. Stacks of documents lay on the table, some still warm from the printer. The stakes were clear. This wasn't just about a viral moment or a political debate. This was about accountability. A senior attorney, a no-nonsense woman with years of media litigation experience, set her pen down and leaned back. "The defamation angle is strong," she said, "but we can also argue professional harm. This wasn't just criticism. It was an orchestrated attempt to discredit you." Karoline listened carefully. She wasn't the type to jump into legal battles lightly, but this was different. This was about setting a precedent. The more they dug, the worse it got. Internal emails surfaced, leaked messages between producers and staff that hinted the segment had been pre-planned as an exposure piece, not a genuine interview. One line in particular stood out: "Make sure she stumbles. Cut her off if she gets too comfortable." That wasn't journalism. That was an ambush. By the next morning, news broke that Karoline Leavitt was officially pursuing legal action. The network's response was immediate and chaotic. Their lawyers rushed to issue statements, calling the lawsuit frivolous and a desperate political stunt. But the damage was already spreading. The lawsuit wasn't just about Karoline anymore. It was about media ethics, about how certain voices were treated on national platforms. The backlash deepened. More advertisers backed out. The show's ratings plummeted. Viewers on both sides of the aisle started asking the same question. If they had nothing to hide, why were they scrambling? Then, something unexpected happened. A former producer came forward, first anonymously, then publicly. In an exclusive interview, she admitted what many had suspected. The show had a history of coordinating attacks against conservative guests. Producers were instructed to push them into uncomfortable moments, cut them off, mock them subtly, and control the edit. She provided emails, memos, and even unedited footage from past interviews. Clips that made it clear what happened to Karoline wasn't an accident. It was standard practice. Suddenly, this wasn't just a lawsuit. It was an expose, and the network was running out of ways to spin it. Inside their headquarters, the atmosphere was suffocating. Executives barked orders, legal teams huddled over conference tables, and PR specialists scrambled to craft the perfect damage control statement. They had dealt with controversies before, but this wasn't just another bad press cycle. This was a full-scale crisis. The network released an official statement, but it fell flat. "We stand by our commitment to free and open discussion," it read. "While we regret any misunderstanding, we maintain that our hosts acted within the bounds of spirited debate." It was a carefully worded non-apology, and it made things worse. Viewers saw right through it. By the next morning, the show's social media pages were in freefall. Comments were turned off, dislikes skyrocketed, and more advertisers severed ties. The message was clear. Corporate sponsors didn't want the heat. Then came the first major internal casualty. One of the show's lead producers resigned. The press release called it a mutual decision, but insiders leaked the truth. They were trying to contain the fire, but it was too late, because now the legal proceedings had officially begun. Karoline's team subpoenaed internal records, looking for more proof of coordinated media bias and targeted defamation. And what they found was worse than anyone expected. More emails, more memos, more undeniable proof that the network wasn't just reporting news. They were manipulating it. And then, the biggest bombshell yet. A second former employee came forward. This time, it wasn't just about the talk show. It was about the entire network. They alleged that this wasn't an isolated incident. Certain guests were strategically discredited, shut down, and ridiculed to fit a pre-approved narrative. Suddenly, Karoline's case wasn't just about her. It was about the credibility of the entire media institution. And as the legal battle heated up, the network had to face a chilling reality. They weren't just fighting Karoline anymore. They were fighting the truth. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled every available seat, their cameras and notebooks ready to capture every detail. Outside, the scene was even more chaotic. Protesters, supporters, media vans lined up for blocks. This wasn't just a lawsuit. It had become a cultural battleground. Karoline sat beside her attorneys, calm but focused. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment. The network's legal team was formidable, but she knew they weren't just fighting her. They were fighting their own past mistakes. The trial began with opening arguments. Karoline's lawyers laid it out plainly. This case isn't about political differences. It's about media accountability. Our client was targeted, discredited, and professionally harmed, not through honest journalism, but through calculated deception. Then came the evidence. The leaked emails, the producer's testimony, the unedited footage from previous interviews that showed a clear pattern of coordinated bias. Every piece tightened the noose around the network. Their defense team tried to argue that heated debate was normal, that Karoline was simply playing the victim. But then, the former producer took the stand. She testified under oath that producers were given pre-show instructions to ensure conservative guests never came out looking strong. And when she read one particular email out loud, the entire courtroom went silent. Do not let her finish full sentences. Keep control. Mock lightly. Make her lose credibility. That single line shattered any illusion that the interview had been fair. The network's attorneys fought back, calling the show's format entertainment, not journalism. They argued that guests should expect tough questioning. But Karoline's attorneys countered with something even stronger, a video montage, a direct comparison of how liberal guests were treated versus how conservatives were treated. One side showed respectful interviews, uninterrupted responses, and softball questions. The other, constant interruptions, sarcasm, mockery, and cheap shots disguised as debate. The jury watched in silence. The contrast was undeniable. Then came the financial records. Karoline's team presented data proving that her reputation had suffered measurable damage. Speaking engagements canceled, opportunities withdrawn, a deliberate attempt to silence her. At that moment, the case shifted. This wasn't just a media controversy anymore. This was a reckoning. And as closing arguments wrapped up, the jury had only one question to answer. Did the network cross the line? The entire country waited for the verdict. The jury's decision came faster than expected. When the judge re-entered the courtroom, everyone held their breath. Karoline sat still, her hands folded in her lap. The network's legal team, once confident, now looked drained. The foreperson stood. In the matter of defamation and professional harm, we, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff. Karoline Leavitt. Gasps filled the room. Murmurs. A few stunned expressions. Karoline closed her eyes for a brief moment, exhaling as the weight of the past few months finally lifted. The damages were significant. A multi-million-dollar settlement, a public admission of wrongdoing. The network was forced to issue a formal apology, not just to Karoline, but to every guest who had been subjected to their tactics. But the fallout didn't stop there. The show was officially canceled. The network framed it as a restructuring decision, but everyone knew the truth. Advertisers weren't coming back. The brand was too toxic. More employees came forward. More unethical practices were exposed. This wasn't just a loss for the network. It was a turning point for political media. And Karoline, her career didn't just survive, it thrived. She became a symbol of pushing back against media manipulation. Book deals, speaking engagements, a stronger platform than ever. But she didn't use it to gloat. Instead, she left the public with this. It's not about silencing people you disagree with. It's about accountability. The media isn't supposed to manufacture reality. It's supposed to report it. And that was a message no one could ignore. If this story made you think, share it. The conversation about media bias and accountability isn't over. Make sure your voice is heard. Subscribe for more stories that challenge the narrative, because the truth, it always comes out. And Karoline, her career didn't just survive. It flourished beyond what anyone, even her staunchest supporters, had anticipated. In the aftermath of the trial, she emerged not just as a political figure, but as a symbol of resilience, a warrior against media corruption, and a voice for those who had long felt silenced. What had begun as an attempt to humiliate and discredit her had instead catapulted her into a position of undeniable influence. Book deals flooded in from major publishers, each vying for the chance to put her story into print. But she was deliberate in her choice, refusing to sensationalize her experience or turn her battle into a mere cash grab. Instead, she focused on what mattered most, exposing the deeper issues within modern journalism and offering solutions. Her book, Truth on Trial, exposing the media's hidden agenda, wasn't just a bestseller. It was a cultural moment. It was read by millions, dissected in classrooms, and cited in political debates. Its impact rippled far beyond her own career, forcing even her critics to acknowledge that she had sparked a conversation that could no longer be ignored. But Karoline didn't stop at writing. Speaking engagements filled her calendar, from packed auditoriums in universities to high-profile political conferences. She stood before crowds of thousands, not just conservatives, but liberals, independents, and skeptics. People from all walks of life who had one thing in common. They were beginning to question the media narratives they had once accepted as truth. She didn't use these platforms to gloat, nor did she indulge in personal attacks against those who had wronged her. Instead, she focused on something bigger. Her message was clear, unwavering, and powerful. It's not about silencing people you disagree with, she told audiences time and time again. It's about accountability. The media isn't supposed to manufacture reality. It's supposed to report it. The words resonated like a call to arms for truth seekers everywhere. People weren't just listening, they were acting. Independent journalists gained traction. Media watchdog organizations saw record support, and a new wave of citizen-led investigations into media bias began sweeping through the digital landscape. Even those who had once dismissed Karoline as just another partisan figure were forced to reckon with the reality she had exposed. Debates on media integrity began shifting. News organizations, feeling the pressure of public scrutiny, scrambled to revise their ethical guidelines. Some networks even issued quiet apologies for past reporting biases, hoping to avoid the kind of reckoning Karoline had ignited. But her fight wasn't just about a single network or a single case of media malpractice. It was about the broader issue, the way truth itself had become a battleground. She urged people not to blindly trust any one outlet, not even the ones they agreed with, but to always question, to seek facts over narratives, and to demand transparency from those who claim to inform the public. And in the end, that was her true victory. Not just winning a lawsuit, not just reclaiming her reputation, but igniting a movement, one that would outlast her, outgrow her, and continue pushing for honesty in journalism long after the headlines faded. If this story made you think, share it. The conversation about media bias and accountability isn't over. It's only just beginning. Make sure your voice is heard. Subscribe for more stories that challenge the narrative. Because the truth, it always comes out